Today we are going to look at social learning theory for this teaching episode. The purpose and learning objectives. The first learning objective is that class members will be able to recognize the most important concepts and theorists of the social learning theory. Learning objective number 2 is that class members will be able to understand ways to apply the social learning theory in their classrooms. The 4 topics we are going to touch on today are Alberto Bandura, the 4 concepts of social learning, the Bobo doll experiment, and social learning in the classroom. Albert Bandura was born in December of 1925 in the province of Alberta, Canada. In 1949, he received his BA from the University of British Columbia. He then went on to the University of Iowa, where he obtained his doctorate in 1952. Upon graduation, he did a clinical internship and then the following year accepted a teaching position at Stanford, where he continues to teach today. Bandura has done a great deal of work on social learning throughout his career and is famous for his social learning theory, which he has recently renamed social cognitive theory. He focuses on the acquisition of behaviors. He believes that people acquire behaviors through observation of others, then imitate what they observe. Several studies involving television commercials and videos containing violent scenes have supported this theory of modeling. Social learning theory explains human behavior in terms of interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental influences. Bandura has conducted many studies involving observational learning or modeling. His modeling process includes 4 steps: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. The first one is attention. In order for an individual to learn anything, he or she must pay attention to features of modeled behavior. Many factors contribute to the amount of attention one pays to the modeled activities, such as characteristics of both the observer and the person being observed. The second step is retention. If an individual is influenced by the observing behaviors, he or she needs to remember the activities that were modeled at one time or another. Imagery and language aid in this process of retaining information. Humans store the behaviors they observe in a form of mental images or verbal descriptions, and then they are able to recall the image or description later to reproduce the activity. That leads us to our third step, which is reproduction. Reproduction involves converting symbolic representations into appropriate actions. A person's ability to reproduce a behavior improves with practice. And lastly, that brings us to motivation. To imitate a behavior, the person must have some motivating factor behind it, such as incentives. The imagined incentives act as reinforcers. Negative reinforcers discourage the continuation of the modeled activity. Bandura combines both behavioral and cognitive philosophies to form his social learning theory. One of Bandura's most famous experiments dealing with modeling is his study with Bobo dolls. In one particular experiment, Bandura showed a video to children in which an adult beat up the doll, called it names, etc. Bandura divided the children into 3 groups. Each group watched it had a different ending. The first video showed the adult being rewarded for its behavior. The second video showed the adult being punished for his behavior, and the last video showed no consequence at all. He then studied the difference between male and female children and how they reacted to the video in regards to whether they imitated the behavior or not. The results showed that males in all cases imitated the viewed behavior more so than the females. The results also showed that children who watched the video and the person was rewarded for his actions duplicated the behaviors more so than when the person was punished or did not receive a punishment or a reward. This was consistent in both male and female children, supporting Bandura's argument that people learn from observing others. So next is social learning in the classroom. So really take a minute and think about, how would you apply social learning to your classroom? Or do you apply social learning to your classroom? In the picture, you see parents trying to stop their children from fighting physically with one another. But how are the children punished? That's right, by beating them. In other words, they are giving the children the message, don't fight with each other by using physical violence. But when you are an adult, you can use violence to discipline your children. This is very confusing to children and is more likely to make them turn physical punishment of others. more than any other means of solving conflict because they've not observed any other ways of dealing with anger. And that concludes our presentation on the social learning theory.